Hi, this is Steve, K8BZ. Lately I've seen a lot of requests on ham radio blogs for information and suggestions on logging programs, which logging programs are the best, which ones are recommended, and how to actually use a logging program, whether there's really any benefit to using one or not. I've tried to respond to some of those, but I find it's very difficult because there's just so much to say about logging programs. So instead, what I've decided to do is make a series of videos on using a computerized logging program in ham radio. There's a lot to say in these videos, so I've decided to break them up into very short videos, as short as I can keep them and still cover the necessary information. Now, the logging program I'm going to describe is the one I have been using for years. It's N3FJP's Amateur Contact Log. It's a very good log. I have no problem with it whatsoever, and I do recommend it. But I'm not trying to say that it's the best or that it's the only one out there. There are lots of logging programs. This is just the one I use. It's the one I'm familiar with, so it's the one I'm going to describe. In this first video in the series, the first thing I'm going to show is how to interface the log program with your radio. And in my case, I'm going to interface it with two radios. You can switch right from the log program to either of the radios that you have configured to interface it to. So if you're using one radio and want to use that to log the frequency, band, and mode from, you can do that and control the radio from the log program. Then if you want to switch to the other radio through a simple selection of key punches, you can quickly switch to the other radio and use that. So I'll show how to set that up in N3FJP's Amateur Contact Log, and then later on I'll show other videos to show other features of the log program and the benefit that you gain from using a logging program. So with that, let's get on to setting up interfacing N3FJP with two Icom radios. Okay, we're going to get started setting up the rig interface to N3FJP's Amateur Contact Log. The first thing you're going to need is a cable that goes from the radio to the computer. Most of the time with newer radios, they're going to use a USB cable. Some Icom radios may also only have what they call a CI5 or CI-V cable. That's Icom's nomenclature for Computer Interface 5, which is what they call that feature on their radio. Other manufacturers might call it a CAT control for computer-aided transceive. CI-V or CI5 that Icom uses, that terminology, and a CAT control that Yaesu or other manufacturers use, it's the same thing. Means the same thing. So for Icom radios, for the 7600, I can use either a dedicated rig control cable called a CI-V cable that's available from Icom or other third-party vendors. Or the easiest way is just to get a USB cable with the correct connectors and plug it into your radio, plug the other end into available USB port on your computer. When you do that, the computer running Windows 10 is going to recognize new hardware. It's automatically going to find the driver for that online and install the driver, and within, depending on your internet speed, within a short period of time, it's going to tell you it's installed and ready to use. Now, your computer may only at that point have one COM port, but it's possible that it could have several. New computers nowadays don't come with actual COM ports installed. Older computers, that used to be standard equipment on computers that they use to send data to and from printers or other devices and sound modems and all sorts of things. But that technology has been replaced by USB ports. But a lot of ham radio gear wants to use a COM port. So in my case, I bought a expansion card with two actual COM ports that I use for other ham radio related things. But for the rig interfaces, I just use either the CI-V cable for my Icom 7000 or I use a USB cable for the 7600. So we need to know what virtual COM port it created when these were plugged in. So we're going to click the Start button in Windows 10 and then just type in Device Manager. And it'll self-complete. When you see Device Manager, you can push Enter and it will open Device Manager. And in Device Manager, we want to look down the menu until we get to Ports, COM, and LPT. We're going to expand that menu item, and we'll scroll down a little bit. And this shows you, in my case, all of the COM ports that are installed in my PC. It's not likely you're going to have that many in yours unless you've been interfacing things via COM ports in your computer and have put in some COM ports. But in my case, I have several. Now, in order to determine which one is the COM port that's actually communicating with the Icom 7000, and in your case, if you installed it on your radio, plugged it into the computer, installed the driver, it's going to show one or more COM ports here. In order to determine which one is the one connected to your radio, I'm going to reach behind the radio and unplug the cable from the radio. And you'll see one of these COM ports will disappear when that list refreshes. So we're going to unplug it. The list refreshes. And you might not have caught it, but it was COM port 9 that disappeared. That's no longer on the list. So we know that COM port 9 is the COM port that is used by the Icom 7600. Now, if I can find the socket, there we go. I'll plug it back in. And COM port 9 again reappeared on the list. So we're going to make a note of that. The Icom 7600 is using COM port 9. I'm going to right-click on COM port 9 and go down and open the properties for that COM port. Then I'm going to click on the port settings. These are the notes you want to make because you'll need them when you interface your log program to communicate with your rig. COM port 9, bit rate is 9600 baud, 8 data bits, no parity, 1 stop bit. So that's the information we need. COM 9, 9600, 8 none, and 1. So we can close out Device Manager. Now we're going to go in the log program to Settings and go down to Rig Interface. Here we're going to select from the select the rig, and we're going to select Icom. COM 9 is already selected, but if it was on another one, we just click on COM 9, and then we're going to set the baud rate at 9600 baud, 8 data bits, no parity, and 1 stop bit. The last thing we need to select is the refresh rate. By default, this program, I believe, has 2 seconds for the refresh rate. What that is that's how often the log program will poll the rig to read the frequency, band, and mode. 2 seconds for me is a little annoying. If I change band or change frequency or change mode, there's a noticeable delay before the log actually updates that information and displays it on the log. It can be up to 2 seconds. That isn't all that long a period of time, and it's usually not a problem, but it just bothers me when I change mode or band or frequency and don't see it displayed. I want to see it instantly so I know my log is in communication with my rig, and I don't realize that something glitched and I'm no longer reading the correct band or mode or frequency. So I usually set it up at 500 milliseconds. When you do that, that's 1/2 second. When you do that, the program is going to give you a little notice saying that might be a little too fast for some computers and might cause some problems. But it doesn't cause a problem in mine, so I keep it set to 500 milliseconds. The last thing we need now, if you look in these 2 windows down here, you'll see some figures in there. What those are hex numbers, hexadecimal numbers. The third set in both of those is the hex address that your radio uses for its CI5 or CAT control. That's the hex address that it sends the data via. In order to find out what that is, you can either go in the menu settings on your radio and find it, or you can go to the manual and find what the default setting is if you've never changed it from the default setting. So I'm going to open a PDF version of my manual, and I'll go up here to the top. I like keeping PDF versions of the manuals because I can search them quickly, and I'll show you what I mean by that. We want to find out what the default hex address is for the CI5 or CIV rig control is for this Icom 7600. So When I have the PDF file open, I'm going to hold Control and push F. It's going to open up a search window, and I'm going to type in CI-V. And we are going to search for that. And it will take you to the first occurrence of it in this PDF manual. And I'm just going to keep clicking the down arrow up here until I get to the part that I want to see. And it keeps going to the CIV address. Here's the baud rate. And this is the CIV address here. Okay, the default setting is 7 alpha. That's the hex number for the computer interface 5 hex address. The H after the alpha here, where it shows what the default setting is, that H just means that that's a hexadecimal number. That H is not part of the number itself. So it's 7 alpha. So we're going to go back to our log program, and this third set of numbers, the command to read the frequency, you need to put in 7 alpha, because that's the hex address where it's going to find it. And the command to read the mode, we're going to change this third set of 64 also to 7 alpha. After we have all that in, we have the right baud rate selected, and we have 9600, 8 none and 1 for data bits, parity, and stop bits. And we can click test, and we can see now, so this every half second, this is showing that it's polling the rig, because we set the radio polling rate at 500 milliseconds. So here you can see it's reading the frequency, it's displayed here, and it's reading the mode. If I change the mode to CW on the radio, you'll see that this changes and updates here. If I change the band to 20 meters on the radio, you'll see it switches the frequency over here to the 20 meter frequency on the VFO on the radio. Now, we want to save these settings so we don't, if something happens, we don't have to look them up again. So we're going to go over here and click the Save Settings button, and we're going to give it a name. It'll give it a generic name of icom.rig, but I'm going to put 2 icoms in here, so I want to identify the specific rig. So this is going to be let's make it uppercase, IC-7600, and we'll save that. Okay, now if for some reason, I just went back up here and clicked None for Select Rig, and it shut off the rig interface. If we want to load it for that, we're just going to go over here to Load Settings. We're going to select the Icom 7600 and open it. It's going to load those settings, and we're back. So we don't have to look up those settings again if something goes wrong. In addition to that, we can save a second set of settings. So let's do that. We're going to set it up for the Icom 7000, which I also have plugged into the computer through a CI5 cable. The Icom 7000 uses COM port 5. It also uses 9600 baud, 8 none and 1. I'm going to keep it at 500 milliseconds, but the Icom 7000 has a different hex address, and it's 75. So we're going to put 75 in here in place of the 7 alpha. 75. Now we'll click test. The Icom 7000 is actually set on the local 2 meter packet frequency, and you can see when I click test it's reading 145.09, which is the local 2 meter packet frequency. The rig is actually set to FM mode. Even though I use this frequency in packet, it shows you the mode that the rig is actually set on. So we're going to save these settings also, and this is going to be called the Icom 7000. And we'll save those settings. So we have 2 different radios interfaced with the computer, and this log program can switch between whichever radio we want to use to log contacts with. So we're all finished with that. We can click Done. Now we're back to the regular main log page where you'd enter the data. And now the band, mode, and frequency self-completes. So if you change frequency, let me switch over to the 7600. Now from the main log page, you can switch to the other radio by holding the control key and pressing X. And you'll see when I do that, it switched over to the 7600, which is on 20 meter CW. If I change the radio to 40 meters, it's going to read that band change and read the new frequency and display it in the log. Holding Control X again will take me back to the other radio on 2 meters. Control X takes me back to the 7600. So You can interface more than one radio, save the settings so you don't have to look them up again once you get them all set up in there and test them and see that they work. I believe that N3FJP Contact Log used to limit you to 2 radios, but I believe now you can put in even more. Don't hold me to that. You can look that up on their website, but I believe you can put in more than one frequency, or I'm sorry, more than one rig interface setting. So if you have even more radios, and let's say one's a Elecraft K3 or maybe a Yaesu radio, you just put in the proper configuration for that, save the settings, use Control X, and it'll scroll through the various radios that you have interfaced with your computer, and your log program can select the one that you want to use, that you're currently using to log contacts with. So that's about it. That's probably the first thing I would recommend doing. Once you get a log program up and running, get it interfaced with your radio, because there's other very handy things that you'll be able to use that for later on, other than just pre-filling your band and mode, and we'll get into that in some of the next videos. So thanks for watching. If you run into any problems or concerns, feel free to email me at k8bz@arrl.net. Thanks for watching.